It's really true. And it's kind of like really interesting because it all came, I feel, with the solar eclipse and with the new moon in Aries and everything what just been to. And also like we wanted to have our talk and then we postponed it because we both like I felt sick. I was in bed and I felt like so tired. You were like felt really tired. And I always feel like this is a sign that something major is like going on. And so you can't resist that. You just need to be and observe it in a way and also like to allow it. And I really believe also like if we would have done the podcast like 1.5 week before, it wouldn't have the same energy, I feel, or the same purpose of the message that we are want to bring out here today than today.
Yeah, it would have been forcing it. I was
Yeah.
definitely a bit of a basket case. First time I'd really been sick in about 3 years, and a lot of things coming up to the surface. So I'm very, very glad that we waited.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah.
But I'm also very glad that you are here today and we talk about like yourself. We talk about letting go old identities and welcoming the new path. And sometimes it can be very shaking and sometimes it can be really like triggering in the ways and it can feel lonely. It can feel depressed. It can be feeling like something very heavily is like weighing on our shoulders. So it can be also feel very beautiful and very graceful and understanding of like the balances between like the masculine and the feminine approaches and how we can deal with it, what tools we can use, um, and the beautiful side of understanding of who we actually really are. So
Mhm.
I'm really curious about you and your past and everything what aligned to the fact that we are now talking. And with like the pre-recording, I told you that I feel whatever you've been through, you seem so unattached. So I'm before we go deeper into the why you're feeling so unattached, I really want to know what led you to the fact and the way what you're doing now and how you feel right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of the past and what brought me to this stage. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's a story you hear a lot, but it's essentially of suffering leading to a huge shift. So when I was younger, kind of in my teenage years, started experiencing a lot of depression. And went the traditional route of talking to doctors, trying to figure it out that way, going on medication, and feeling super, super disconnected, feeling really low, and things started spiraling essentially worse and worse over the years. So um, yeah, by the time I was in my 20s, it was just kind of this perpetual state of darkness, of heaviness, where I'd have light moments, have fun with my friends, and little things that would make me curious, enjoy going out in nature, these kind of things, but um, really quite heavily depressed in my day to day, and started going on more medication and um, kind of going down this path psychologically of going deep into being a victim and self-loathing, these kind of things that it's essentially the mind getting more and more loud into ruminations where just there's these cycle of thoughts that just keep coming back and you feel like you're getting tormented a bit.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so essentially that process eventually cracked. We've talked about it a number of times, but going through that experience is kind of what really led to where I am now, being able to step through that and learn those lessons, essentially start to live more aligned with who I actually am and a more natural state of being is kind of the way uh, on a high level I'd put it, but very happy to get into the details more. Yeah.
Like I said, like it's so tremendously inspiring how you talk about it because when you told me today that you have been suicidally depressed, I was like, wow, okay, you know, like this is something that I want to dig deeper into it, how you overcame it, and also what tools
Mhm.
you used. And also because you also mentioned that 2 years ago you maybe would have been angry about like the system, you maybe would have been angry about your parents, you know, like how did you overcome the anger, but also like the what tools did you use to really like ground yourself into your being, and also what do you feel, what is the root cause of depression in our society?
Yeah, wow. So the root cause I'd probably start with that, you know, the big piece is it feels like starting to live a life that's just not yours to live.
Mm,
That you kind of go further and further off the path of who you truly are, and kind of that, that natural state of what makes you happy. Um, and I think a lot of people experience this of kind of, you start giving up on some of your dreams or some of your interests. Um, you start buying into a lot of stuff. You start building these identity structures of who I am, um, and it kind of, it just grows and grows and grows to the point where you're kind of so disconnected from who you truly are. And my sense is essentially the depression is this loud signal saying you're way off track, essentially, and not in this state of something to feel bad about, but like a signal, a sign. Um, Similar to if you have your lungs are hurting and you're smoking a ton, it's a sign for your body saying, it's time to change something. There's something off in your system. Um,
mm,
if you're running a ton and your ankles, your knees are hurting, well, it's a sign that you probably should be doing something differently.
mm,
Change your running style, whatever that might be. And I think depression is something similar a lot of the times. Um, at least in my case, like I'm not going to make kind of too wide sweeping generalizations because it's super complex. But with that, it's also it's this conditioning essentially. So my favorite way of putting it is if we're like a driver in a car and you have this car that's just building up mud and all mud all over the windshield, all over the windows to the point where you can't really see out anymore. Um, and this mud might be what you learn from your parents, what you learn from school, from the media, what you go through these early childhood events, genetic stuff, ancestral stuff. Um, but it just piles on. It's kind of all this conditioning that ends up shifting us from who we truly are. And for me, depression is when that gets so thick that you disconnect from who's in the driver's seat, that you're just kind of this you're kind of lost is the general sense of it. Um, and so with that process, it's tricky because with the, so this is the part that would have made me angry before, but it's when you go talk to a doctor, the traditional sense is, well, something's off neurochemically. There's something off with your brain.
mm,
And that's what's causing it. It has nothing to do with, the environment, nothing to do with kind of day-to-day living, society, nothing about how you're being. But it's neurochemistry is the opinion. So then from there, I took that belief on from an early age and thought, okay, everything around me is normal. Everything in my body, everything in my system, my mind, all these things, all it's showing me is that there's something broken within me. Um, and with that, the fix ends up being, how do I fix the neurochemistry in my brain through medication, or stop the things outside of me from happening versus figuring out the tools to work internally and process these things and essentially shift my life in a direction that feels, natural, exciting, healthy, these kind of you know, ways that are much more aligned with who I am.
I like really like the metaphor with the mud and the dust and everything, and that you taking on all the conditioning of like deep down ancestral or society or whatsoever. And it's true, it's like we believe that something is wrong with us when we don't fit into a system, that perceives everything as like aligned, or perceives, or we perceive that everything is like it needs to be this way. And I'm talking with a lot of men who experience like depression in a way of like in regards to their work environment, or in regards to the money situation, in regards to feeling safe and connected to the purpose of a man and everything. So before I want to go deeper into this, and also what shake up with you, I would love to know if you can bring me back to this moment where you had the realization that you need to shift something, that something is out of alignment, and what caused you to let go of the medication and to dig deeper into your soul.
Sure, it's not the easiest answer, but the way I like to put it is things get louder in life. So
Mm.
if initially something's off, now you might be able to hear it on a subtle level, and it feels like a little bit of a whisper. Things just feel off a little bit. You might feel a little uneasy, maybe a bit tired, and then it becomes something audibly speaking to you. Eventually it's yelling at you. And I joke that life at the end was kind of picking me up and throwing me on the ground over and over again, just say kind of wake up, like uh, to the point where there's no real ability to ignore it because the suffering got so significant. Um, and so that's the main way that things started to shift. That at one point, essentially, um, everything in my life had felt like it was crumbling apart. So I had no money, no partner, didn't know what to do for work. My housing situation was extremely unstable. I was, drinking, smoking, on a ton of medication, these kind of things where, um, my body felt horrendous, really, really overweight, feeling my heartbeat really intensely through my system. Um, and so there was a few wake up calls within that of life kind of saying, this is really not working, right? This is really far off track. And
Mm.
there are a few moments that did make it a how do I put it? That made it more obvious that something has to shift now, that it's not this hypothetical or this outward looking thing that on the horizon at some point I need to shift, which if your life's off track. But one moment was a friend got me to kind of close my eyes at one point when I was in a really, really tough spot, and um, feel into my body and kind of enter a meditative state, which I never meditated at the time, but that's essentially what it was, and feel into my body and get quiet. And at some point, I essentially had this experience where it felt like my heart just stopped. It felt like this intense constriction where my heart stopped, and I almost witnessed my own death. Is the feeling that I had in that moment,
Wow.
that I could feel it stop, saw it, opened my eyes, saw this. It sounds ridiculous, but saw this kind of dark, shadowy figure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I just broke down. Like I was in shock, essentially, turned white, just bawling my eyes out, because it felt so clearly like, whatever that is, whether that's the subconscious, whether that's life, spirits, whatever you want to call it, it's this clear signal that essentially uh, there was no question in my mind. It was saying like, if you continue down this path, you're going to die. Um,
Wow.
and I felt it. I felt that it was a heart attack. As I said, I was drinking a ton, smoking a ton, on a lot of medication, drinking an absurd amount of coffee, these things to essentially numb out and keep functioning.
Yeah.
Um, Working a job at a startup that I didn't like, but paid the bills and, was kind of aligned with what traditionally is viewed as successful, or what I went to school for, and thought this is what I was supposed to do. Um, so that was probably the singular moment that really started shifting things of, it's not going to be this kind of small course correction, but it requires like a really significant major shift. And so shortly after that, I had another experience that was, a bit more run of the mill, bit more of a normal experience. Um, but it was essentially my friend asking me like, if money wasn't an option, If money had nothing to do with it, what would you do right now? What would you do for the next year? And so clearly it came through. I want to create art. I just want to create art, and you know that's it. And a friend said, "Okay, do that. Pursue that." And that was kind of this other turning point where I started creating, and started going back to something that I'd been this lifeboat at different points in my life. It, as a kid, kind of lit me up. Big in my family, back to my great grandparents, of a lot of artists, a lot of people who love creativity, and that moment kind of created a spark where you're at such a low point where you have nothing to lose, is the feeling. So you say, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to start creating art. And the next day I started a project. It just so happened to involve wood, because it was just something I found online that I wanted to make something similar. And that's kind of the process that started shifting my life, was getting into woodwork. And through that, diving into my psyche, diving into spirituality, philosophy, all these different things, and piece by piece reorganizing my life, of letting go of things that are unhealthy, which was a huge laundry list at the time,
I
and
believe
kind of
that.
reintegrating and bringing back things into my life that I love.
Wow. This is impressive, Alex. And especially and especially taking the steps and the bravery to really let go of certain things that were making you feel so comfortable, also in a
Mhm.
way of, also if it created numbness, it was still a feeling of safety, because you felt safe. Like, I assume you felt safe also, like, in the toxicity. And this is something that we as a society, it's hard to let go of something that makes us feel safe, because we want to feel safe. So is it
Mm.
about like money? Is it about like other people? Is it about like a society that tells us we need to go to school, we need to do certain degrees in order to really actually like live a fulfilled life? So there's like so many gold nuggets that I feel I want to address. And the main gold nugget that I also want to address is the fact of like what you said about the heart attack, and seeing you dying, and also the spark that broke you open in a way that you never felt before. So now, with all of the knowledge and all of the wisdom that you gained also like the last couple of years, what would you say, what was that particular moment? What's been going on there? What
In
has been
terms of
going
the
on there?
like the big spark that kind of shifted after that, to bring kind of the light back in, or
Yeah, yeah, like I want to know like how your heart felt in this moment when you decided to shift your life.
okay. Yeah, it's interesting. It feels very similar to something I'm feeling these days, because I'm in another big shift. But it's this, feels kind of, it reminds me of a childishness, of kind of this playfulness and possibility and curiosity, um, like taking off a really heavy backpack, um, and kind of taking a big load off your shoulders. And I was lucky at the time, because again, there was kind of, things had gone bad, uh, or off to the degree that I really had nothing to lose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I was lucky with that. Um, but one of the big words that comes up is curiosity as well. So I had kind of lost that in my life. And then with that moment, you start having curiosity of, what can I do? Or what can I create if this doesn't matter right now? And I mean, practically it did matter. I did need money to afford my life and these kind of things, but it was more kind of this underlying shift. Um, and so with curiosity, it brought me back into going really deeply into different topics. So some was art, but some became, going really deep into psychology, and philosophy and spirituality, and dabbling into neurochemistry and neurobiology and quantum physics, these kind of things, where not becoming an expert, but being fascinated and really having this drive to go into it. So kind of that self-help to some degree, but into all these different aspects. Whereas before, it was very much kind of relying on other people. So if I have a problem, okay, let's see what the doctor says or a therapist says, and try and hope for the best, essentially. Where that shift and that drive back to curiosity kind of put some of the power back in my own hands. It was this empowering feeling of, okay, let's start taking action. Let's start moving in that direction, and doing it from within, essentially, versus hoping someone else can fix me. Someone else can do this for me, but taking the power back, um, and from a place, again, it's curiosity. It's not this I'm going to figure it out. It's not this um, not heaviness, but more this playful drive. Um, it's a really tough one to put into words.
It is, because it's connected to the heart. And sometimes, not sometimes, but especially when you grow up in a world that really operates most of the time from the mind, or like from the, wounded masculine approach, or whatsoever you want to call it, it's very interesting when you connect to the depth of your heart the first time, because this is what I personally believe what depression is. Like, depression is, for me, like, there's a pressure of your soul that basically like says there's immensely something right now out of alignment, which is okay, because you're here to experience life to its fullest. But on one point, you learned the lesson of what doesn't work in society. So let's bring you back into alignment to your highest purpose and mission in life. And this is to connect to the depth within, to connect to your heart, to the feminine energy within, and to create with the abundance that you carry alongside the ride. So you said it pretty amazing in regards to that art and creativity connected you to your own depth. And I would love to know how that shifted in your life, and what you also felt by creating art in your body.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, from that moment, I essentially decided to move back to my parents' house, which is when you're mid-20s, is kind of a psychological and identity death in itself, right? Um, I'd gone to a really good school and was capable of doing a lot of things in business, and kind of at that point, going back to my parents' house felt like this huge failure, right? This huge shift. Everything comes up of what will my friends think, and what does this mean about who I am? But with that process, my parents saw the place I was in and saw I was starting to make this shift, that in my life that I'd been struggling with for about 10, 15 years, something like that. And so I started creating art at my parents with a bit of space. They gave me the space to essentially uh, work on myself and work on art, essentially, as a focus, which is something that most people don't have the luxury of doing. Like, I'm beyond grateful for that experience, even if that initial stage was really uncomfortable. Um, and so over the next little bit, it started feeling a bit like freedom. Um, and again, this playful curiosity, and kind of feeling this momentum of like genuine passion that I felt for little moments in my life, but it was typically around art. It was typically, I'd done Photoshop and different mixed media type things. Just essentially, when I was in low places, I'd use art as a method to get out of my head, to kind of put my focus into something in my creative energy, just instinctively. It wasn't really kind of wasn't really a tool at the time.
Mm.
But as I started to build art, what was interesting so it's a lot of woodwork. It's working with your hands, and it requires a lot of focus. And I'd listen to a lot of podcasts, listen to videos on YouTube, audiobooks, these kind of things, and learn. And in that process, you start seeing everything come up. So you have a lot of time with yourself. So it's just me focusing on something, and that, you start cutting out the distractions. And I started to cut these other things out of my life that I had used as crutches to help numb, to help comfort, these kind of things. So um, in that process, as I let go of, tapered off my medication, as I stopped smoking weed, as I stopped drinking alcohol, stopped watching TVs, you know, uh, let go of watching basketball, which I had been just an avid fanatical fan for a long time. Just in these little nudges of, this is what I have to do in this moment. My whole focus has to be bringing myself back to life, essentially. Um, but with that space, you start seeing everything come up that's been hidden under the surface. It's like you're kind of shining this light around the room that's been in darkness, and you see all the cobwebs. You see, little rats running around and dirt all over the place. So um, you start seeing like the self-critic, the judgmental mind, the perfectionism, the worry, the fears, these ruminating thoughts, all these things that essentially I've been disconnected from. Or it's not quite disconnected from, but you're kind of just trying to repress it and push it down to get through the day. And now it's kind of right in your face.
Yeah.
I joke that sometimes it's shadow boxing. It felt like my mind uh, getting in these fake arguments with people from the past and defending itself against, a friend or a colleague that might say something to slight me. These kind of things, which you can see in the moment is super distorted. And piece by piece, starting to work on those things. So it's kind of this dual process with the art and the creative process, that it ended up being, some of it was this really exciting process that had passion and curiosity and bringing beauty back into my life in a major way. And then the other part was this introspective learning process, and starting to actually work through a lot of those patterns and thought processes, emotional blocks that had been in there since childhood.
Yeah. Wow. This is something that I find always so fascinating, because when you connect to yourself and when you allow to let go of your wounds and to really like also shine the light to the box that you kept hitting away from so long, you realize that there is so much more to live about, and that life is just so much more, that we actually like believe what is life all about. And I'm just like wondering why, because I know, and I'm fascinating also about the knowledge that you have about the masculine and the feminine approach. And one thing that really stuck out for me one day when you had your workshop, and you said that, like, like being in a meditative, like being in a meditative state, it can be everything, like connecting to yourself, connecting to your inner child. In regards, it doesn't matter if it's like meditation or if it's like playing basketball or whatsoever, doing something that really like brings out the inner child within you, but also like brings out the curiosity and the playfulness and the love. And what would you say, what is like the true medicine for men and women who are dealing with depression, or who are dealing with the phase of letting go of a identity that they created in their mind because of society?
It's a big question.
It is.
uh, from I can speak from my own experience mostly, and with my experience, a big part of it was seeking out what lights me up, essentially, what I enjoy. And a lot of that did come back to what I enjoyed as a kid.
Mm.
I think there's a lot of nuggets in that of finding out what really makes you tick and
Mm.
what you really enjoy. That the more we come back to ourselves, the more you're coming back to that natural state, which is kind of the unconditioned state. And you see that much more with kids. They don't have quite as much baggage. They don't have as much of the beliefs of everyone around them in the society, and these traumatic events that we all experience that kind of imprint us. Um, and so, as you said, like, I do love meditation, but a bigger piece was these kind of uh, these aspects of daily life that are meditative, but it's just kind of daily life. So going for long walks with my dog was one of the most therapeutic things, and still is to this day,
Yeah.
of going out into nature, getting quiet, sitting, watching a sunrise, watching a sunset, or just walking for an hour, 2 hours in nature on my own, essentially, or with my dog. Um, playing basketball was something that I loved as a kid. And when I grew up, essentially after high school, where you're playing high school basketball and in leagues and these kind of things, uh,
Mm.
I kind of let it go to some degree. I'd play with friends here and there, but when I started coming back to myself, starting to shoot around on my own, like this last year, going down, being in the park, and just shooting the basketball over and over again, listening to music, and it's this something within me would arise, like you feel this joy and this passion come back, and
Yeah.
realizing I had kind of pushed this away. Like, it's this thing that as a kid I loved. It would, just excite me. It was this way that I would process things, spend time on my own, um, go into dream world, essentially. And there's not enough time when you're older. That's kind of the idea. Or there's other things to do, or get lazy and watch TV, or whatever it might be. Not saying watching TV is lazy, but I'm talking about in my life, I was
Mm.
watching a lot of TV, sitting down watching Netflix or watching basketball versus actually getting out and doing it myself. And art was similar. It's something that lit me up as a kid. There was all these moments I can look back to in my life that I found peace, excitement, joy, curiosity through art, through being on my computer with Photoshop and trying to create something that didn't exist before. Um, going on a bike ride in the middle of the night and just feeling this rush of energy of it's kind of this part of yourself coming back online. And in the inner child way of looking at things, it almost feels like this, oh, you're acknowledging me, we're integrating back, we're coming back alive. um and so that's the nice part, is that I think the question of like what is the medicine, is that a lot of it is, it's actually enjoyable. So what really lights you up, what you connect with, what those little things that keep pulling at you are saying, that you might say, oh, there's not enough time, or oh, that's a pipe dream, or that's childish, whatever might come up. But those things that are pulling at you are usually the medicine. um and some of it's just silliness. uh
Mm.
it's like silliness and playfulness feels like a huge shift, that stop taking yourself so seriously, stop taking everything around you so seriously, of still acting from integrity and trying to build something, but seeing kind of the play in it. So if you're going for a walk, just I would have these moments of just kind of jumping from rock to rock, and going in the middle of the stream, and taking off my shoes and just walking right up the middle of the stream. Um, and they're just these tiny little things that feel like childish playfulness, and yeah, curiosity of coming back to this state of, this is what I want to do. And even if my mind says it's stupid, or what will people think, each time you kind of feel this building of energy that's more who you are, is my sense. It's more freedom. You kind of like unshackle and drop more of these restrictions that we self-impose on ourselves over time.
Yeah. Thank you. Because in the end of the day, it's kind of like, what is it what we really totally fully crave? Is it the money? Is it like the status? Is it like the power, what is it? Or is it like true liberation and true freedom? And do we just believe that we can only access those feelings through the situation of the money? And I'm not saying that money is better whatsoever, because we all, like, for me, money, for example, means freedom. It's a
Mhm.
part of freedom, but it also, like, under which price do I own my livinghood? And I decided I want to choose, and I want to be free in a way of, like, I want to do something what fulfills me deep within my soul. And
Mhm.
I have the feeling a lot of people, and especially men, waking up to the fact in our society that they're exhausted. They're like, when I talk, especially with men, and women, of course, but the external is just so loud in a way that the masculine approach is just in our society like, you need to gain money, you need to be fulfilled, you need to be like, you only be fulfilled and happy when you achieve like certain amount of like power and in the society and everything. And yes, and then on one point you have all the money in the world, um and then you realize there's still some part missing, there's still something missing that I did not integrate. And I feel this is the playful part, this is the creative part, and the feminine part, the connectingness to the heart, what got sometimes out of alignment during the process of the socialization, I feel. And I'm questioning right now, what, like, why do you feel it is so important to connect to your heart in a way of really fully living free as a man as a woman?
Um, yeah, it feels like everything, honestly. I think that's the power in the question that I was asked of, if money was no option, what would you do?
Yeah.
And if you ask yourself that question, I think you'll find, a lot of signs of where to head. And
Mm.
that can feel overwhelming because a lot of questions arise with that, of how does that work? How does that look like? You see the distance between where you are and where you need to go. Um, but I think that is part of it. It's tapping into that the heart's intelligence, the natural state. Um, I'm sorry, I lost track of the second part of the question with it.
It's okay. It's like more like the fact of like, what would you recommend to balance, um those energies within, like, the mind and the heart? Because the
Mm,
mind is a beautiful tool, but
mhm,
we were talking before that, and we were talking about, the mind wants one thing and the heart wants the other thing. But what can we
mhm.
do to balance and to find alignment within, so we can actually like start living the life that we deeply, 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 deeply feel within?
Mm. It's another really tough question to put into words. I'll do. Uh, yeah, it's an interesting one. I think that is what we're all experiencing, is how to balance the mind and the heart, the different hemispheres, the masculine and feminine, and find that state of equilibrium, right? Of
Mm,
balance, equilibrium, harmony, being centered. I think they're all words pointing to the same thing. Um, and for me, what it's been is finding those. It's kind of finding the guidance from the heart, from the body. Um, and from there, I get this knowing of, essentially, this is where I need to go.
mm,
And having the mind kind of come on board with it.
mm,
Um, so there's that saying, I might butcher it, but it's like the mind makes a great servant, but not a great master.
mm,
Um, and I grew up doing very well in school, very analytical, very heady, and so it's been something that I've been challenged with quite a bit, is that the mind always wants to know and wants to figure it out and have the exact plan in these kind of really tricky aspects as you're following your heart, because it's usually unknown. You're jumping
Yeah.
deep into the unknown. So some of, I think woodwork's a good example actually. If as an analogy is, you get into that more intuitive state, and I'd have this idea. I'd have this idea for an art piece, and it starts coming together, and I see this is how I want it to look, and get the vision for it. But then from there, it's the mind and that mental aspect, or the masculine aspect, the active, helping to put that into motion and bring it into existence. So, okay, I have this idea. Here it is down on paper. I have to now put it into form, bring it down from the abstract into something actually tangible. Um, and with that, the mind's amazing. Of okay, we have this this goal that we're looking to achieve, and let's put it into motion. Um, and I think the tricky thing is trying to get enough space where you can start to differentiate between what is kind of the inner guidance, the murmurings, the heart's intelligence, or a healthy state of thinking that's connected, that's in harmony, and what is patterning, what is conditioning, what's fear,
Mm.
um, and starting to separate out those two things. So, a good example from my life is I had this knowing, okay, it's time to leave my woodwork behind a
Mhm.
few years ago, or a year and a half ago, and it's time to move across the country. And I just knew that in all of my being, it's time to move to the mountains and make a big shift. And with that, I have to essentially take a little car. I can't bring all my tools, can't bring my art, and have to leave the business I'd created behind, essentially, leave the identity I'd created unknowingly behind. Of now I'm an artist, which was a bit of a trap in itself. Um, and so having that knowing this is what I'm going to do and stepping out into it, then the mind will was jumping in of all this fear of what does this look like? How am I going to make it work? Um, and you start seeing this kind of chatter come up of that to me is usually a place that I'm not free. If I know this is where I'm supposed to head, and I know that I've kind of tapped in, this is the end goal, or not the end goal, but this is kind of the North Star for the time being.
Yeah.
um, you can see what comes up, and I can see the fear, the desire for certainty, the desire for control, all these things. Then on the other hand, use the mind to actually make an action plan and set things into motion. So it's separating out those aspects, those thoughts, those patterns, the emotions that come up that um, feel like they're coming from an unhealthy place, and working with them, bringing acceptance, love, forgiveness to those parts. Um, Creating some separation and distance from my thoughts helped me, of kind of mindfulness practices, but then having the mind create that action plan to actually make it happen, essentially, so that it doesn't stay as this vision, it doesn't stay as this goal or this dream or this abstract possibility, but it actually there's action behind it, there's rightful action, and that way you kind of marry the two together. That's been my experience with a lot of this, and it's certainly challenging at times, but the more I follow that guidance, the more every aspect of my life has gotten better by a magnitude of degrees that I can't even begin to explain. And if I had sat down and tried to only map it out intellectually and put it down on paper, none of it would have happened. Um, like I know that. And so with that, part of my process is making a list sometimes of, okay, here are all the times I've taken that leap,
Yeah.
that I've known this is mine to do. I know that this is kind of the path to take. And then I remember in that moment how scared I was, or how much my mind told me otherwise, and all the reasons not to do it. Um, and then I know how it unfolded, and I know how perfect it was on the other end of that deep chasm of unknown. And so with that list, uh, it's just kind of in me now, but I used to actually write it down, and it's kind of showing the mind, okay, these are all the ways that things have worked out way better than when we kind of followed the old model, by taking these leaps, by stepping into the unknown. And if I know that this is currently telling me to head in a certain direction, I can trust that it'll, unfold in a similar way, that it'll be way better than anything I could imagine from where I'm sitting right now. And that helps me get the mind on board and create more of a more holistic state of being where the whole system is working towards one goal. It's not this separation. It's not this battle between the two. Um, and it is funny. You're convincing a part of yourself a lot of the times, but it has worked really well for me to step into more trust and faith with that process.
That is incredible. Like how you explain that and how I can feel it also in my heart. Like when you talk about this, I could really feel like this sigh of relief of like, yeah, I totally agree. And we were talking about this also like the last time, that our mind wants to figure out who we are like all the time. Our mind wants to recreate the story because it keeps us safe, because it's a story. It's something that our mind can grasp, and it's kind of like, and it doesn't matter if it's like a story of like a negative attached story or like a positive attached story. It just wants to be seen, and it just wants to also like understand it more in a way of like, okay, and I totally understand what's going on here. But when the mind and the heart gets involved, like you phrase it so beautifully um and very wise, it's the sleep of faith where our heart just has the guidance and our mind is kind of like trying to figure out what it is, but it just like obeys in a way, and it feels like, okay, I go with it because I trust the process. And it's a process because in the beginning, like you said, in regards to letting go of the old identity, it was just something. It's a muscle, right? It's kind of like when you go to the gym and whatsoever, and you just go there once, the muscle can't grow also so strong. But when you surrender even more and really write down, okay, when was the last time? How many times did I took this leap of faith and it worked out beautifully because I was trusting my heart. I was trusting the guidance of it, and my mind was on board with it. It just like deepens faith, and it deepens the balance, and what you also said with the separation, it moves from separation to connectingness, and to really like living in a way that is quite out of our comfort zone, but it's actually like the main reason that we are alive, I feel.
Yeah, I sense you get a ton of freedom through that process. Um, yeah, even from following that, like there's the one aspect of that I would say it's more like convincing my mind, or convincing myself that the guidance I have, that knowing that this is what I have to do, um, you know, having that list to say, okay, let's get on board. This is what we're doing, and it'll work out. Let's take this leap of faith. And the other piece that comes up is kind of the healing path.
Mhm.
So as you're taking those leaps, uh, all your shit comes up. So, uh, if it's one, or not all your shit, but a lot of the things that are relevant to what you're doing will come up. So if when it was leaving a job, a lot of stuff around finances will come up, around certainty, around identity, um, status in society, all the visions we had for the future, all these different things come up. And so you can't just quite convince those parts to come along for the ride. Some of it is also then looking at it and doing the shadow work, or looking and and feeling it fully, essentially, not trying to do what I used to do, which is numb it out or try and bypass it, try and shove it under the carpet. So there's freedom in the steps you take in life, and then if you're working with that process, you're also gaining further freedom by kind of working through those emotional, psychological aspects that will arise when you're making these decisions that seem, like pretty big, unpredictable or unknown jumps sometimes. Um, yeah.
I have a variety of like questions right now. um, One of the question is like, why do you had the feeling or what did you wanted to numb out?
It's essentially all, it's a tricky one. So before I wouldn't have been able to say this, but it's the idea of trauma. And the difficult part, and I think a lot of men experience this as well, and I know everyone does. I've talked to many women friends who have the exact same experience. But when you say trauma, the mind will typically compare it to what other people have experienced, and will have these massive, horrendous experiences that other people have in life, and say, "Well, I can't call mine trauma or issues to deal with because look at what they're dealing with."
Yeah.
And I think that's a big piece, that it becomes that that are kind of these underlying things that you stop looking at. How do I put it? Like, the way I see it is essentially we come into the world and we start experiencing life at an early age, and we're highly, I don't want to say manipulated because there's a bad connotation with that, but we're very malleable. Like, we're being impacted by our surroundings to a huge degree. The idea that you're in the theta brainwave state for the first 7 years of your life, and you're kind of this sponge taking things on, taking things on.
Yeah.
And so in that process, you take on, the beliefs of everything around you. You start to have these experiences with your family, with friends, that start to imprint you, where, it could be a small thing when you look at it objectively, but for a little kid who kind of relies on other people for survival and is in this new unknown place, it kind of leaves these little imprints in you. If someone says something to you as a kid and you really take that on and you don't work through it, that could stay with you the rest of your life if you don't look at it.
Yeah.
So you have that in the first 7 years, then you go to school, and it just kind of magnifies. So then you have, okay, what happens with your peers, with teachers? I have one of my closest friends, where like at a young age, a teacher tells him he's stupid, and is working through that belief to this day when he's an incredibly intelligent and capable person.
Yeah.
And I experienced the same thing. It's these little things that start building up. And so you can see this as, it's kind of the mud, right? That's what's covering over us. And it just gets so big that at some point you don't know what to do with it. So some of it are those moments where it starts being this deep insecurity that you have to push down and move forward with, so that you don't have that vulnerability, essentially, that you're still able to maintain the identity that you have, maybe, or that place in society that people will look up to me, people will respect me, or they won't push me around, whatever that might be. But it's starting to cover these things up, because if I feel it and I show that, first of all, it hurts to a tremendous degree. We don't have the tools to deal with it. And then how that, the feedback of what that would be like with the rest of your life is usually very scary to deal with. So with men, a lot of that the time, that's, if I show my vulnerability, if I show this sadness, this hurt, this pain, shame, guilt, whatever that might be, um, how that comes across to my friends, how that comes across to women, what we see, it becomes a threat. So you start saying, okay, let's push this down. I don't want to feel this, because that's a threat. Essentially, it's a threat to this big house of cards of what we think we need to do to get through life. And then I think the other piece is what you alluded to earlier. It's the idea that if you're so far off path, these signs are going to come up. It's going to get loud. I still experience it to this day. If I'm off path, it will get loud until I hear it and make an adjustment. And so you kind of have these two options. You have, okay, I'm going to listen to the signs saying something is deeply off with how I'm living, or I can numb out, or I can push it down, I can repress it. And I don't think the numbing out and repression is a conscious act most of the time, but for me, it was sitting in front of a TV for hours watching basketball, getting high. I believe a lot of the medication I was taking is just that. It's shutting off these signals in my brain that are saying something's off. And so you start actually chemically putting barriers up to even feeling it. And so the signals get louder and louder and louder, and you're not actually working with what's underneath. You're just kind of, just putting another layer of something on top and just saying like, okay, it's, I don't see it, so it's not there. I'm not experiencing it right now, so it's not there, but it just builds. And yeah, I think that's a lot of what you start experiencing with depression. I felt in my body of, I'm still working through so much tension of, your shoulders up at your ears and all these bracing positions that I actually wasn't even feeling at the time. But as you start coming out of it, you realize that like all of this stuff you are holding,
Yeah.
if we're all holding essentially, but if you're really numbing out and um, with distractions and or hedonism, just seeking out pleasure, all these things that we tend to do, then typically that's just going to get bigger and bigger and more loud, or it's not going to get processed. And it feels dense, it feels heavy. And the more you kind of work through it, the more you feel light and free. That's my experience, and that's the experience of most people that I talk to who are going through a similar process.
This is so helpful, Alex. Seriously, like, especially what you said in the end in regards to our body, because our body holds on to the trauma and whatever we carry, whatever like been passed through also from generations to generations. And like, especially like the upper part and especially like the shoulders and whatever, like has to do with like really making ourselves carry something very heavy. You can see this on people. You can see this in your own like posture. You can see when you want to hide your heart because you want to you feel not safe or something like this. Like our body is our biggest messenger. And yeah, I personally believe that we as a society, when we open ourselves to our emotional wounds and like healing our emotional wounds, um, we stop being trapped in our mind because we open this Pandora box in regards to what we actually like have to offer for ourselves, but also for the world. Um,
Mhm.
so the heart and mind connection and really feeling the self-love also for ourselves and opening up to forgiveness, opening up to letting go of the identity that we created because parental figures or the school system or whatsoever like just put a false lens of our being onto us. It's just something that can that is setting us free.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering also like what would you recommend for men and for women who are going through a similar process of letting go, like first of all like opening the Pandora box of their own healing.
Yeah,
So how should they deal with the fear that also arises from that?
love it. Is the simple answer, but
Mm.
um, yeah, it's. I mean, again, it's kind of from my experience with it is the easiest, but for me, the first step for me was kind of creating distance um, from what I was experiencing. So initially, you're just kind of in this mode where everything's happening to you, and you are your thoughts, and you're just kind of in this chaos. And for me, the biggest step was getting space from that. So getting into that state of being the observer and the witness, so you can see your thoughts and see your emotions versus being carried away by them. So you're no longer being dragged down a river where you feel like you're completely out of control, um, but you're actually able to witness it a little bit and getting more and more space from that. So that if you're seeing all of a sudden, how do I put it? In the old state, if I had fear, I'd act from it 100%.
Mm.
And so acting from it might be projecting on someone else. It might be avoidance, hiding, um, trying to bolster myself in terms of being more aggressive or hyper masculine, so that like that fear isn't coming through, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you're just acting from it, so it's almost trying to say I'm not scared, um, or and dealing with it in a way that's unconscious. And when you start building that space and are able to kind of witness some of those thoughts, witness the emotions, what I experienced was then I can see the mind and I can see the thoughts and the emotions coming up, and you're not getting carried away quite as much. And with that, I started going through a bit of a process with self-healing. So that is where it's kind of for me, it's been this balance of kind of a masculine and feminine version of it, um, where part is feeling it fully, going into the fear
Mm.
and being with it, which is extremely uncomfortable. You know, you'll see you want to pick up your phone or before drink a beer, whatever it might be, turn on TV, but being with it fully and feeling it 100%. And with that, you start releasing some of it. So it's really uncomfortable, but that's the process of that you were saying of love, acceptance, forgiveness, and what helps me is the inner child aspect of that, of seeing that there's an inner child. There's a part of myself as a kid that's scared,
Yeah.
and being able to be there for it, like I would be if I had a nephew who was really struggling, right? Showing that same love, acceptance, forgiveness my inner child that I would to another child externally, essentially. Um, and so with that, you end up processing a lot of the emotions, or that's been my experience.
Yeah.
And what I learned is that on the other end of that, I have kind of a self inquiry aspect where then looking at, okay, where did this fear arise from? Um, and kind of unpacking a little bit, or what's the belief behind this fear? What am I
Now you're back.
Sorry, I don't know if that's you or me, but either way, I'm back.
Okay, no worries. Like you said, I think we left by the fear, like the biggest fear, and also like the one of the biggest fears you just wanted to mention, and how you moved with that.
I honestly don't remember.
Yeah, me neither. It was such a heartfelt, like it was such a heartfelt conversation. I always like recognize this when my mind can't remember like the last piece of what we just like
Mhm.
been through, like talked about. Oh man, but it was so beautiful. Like I was just like, yes, like that's exactly like what so many of us need to hear. Because yeah, I was just right now like all on your lips, and I was just listening. I was like, yes, 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 that's exactly what I really like of our conversation. And I put down like I wrote down like observer. Maybe we can tangle from the stand of being. But if when you have the power and the control to be an observer of your own emotions and of your own thoughts, you can really like see and step out of this, and to understand it in a wider aspect, that in the end of the day, it's all about understanding your patterns. It's all about understanding your habits. It's all about understanding where it comes from, to connect it in order to let it go. When you can't understand it, when you're not aware of your emotional wounds, it's difficult to let some old habits or old beliefs go, because it comes up again and again and again to show you where you can actually like learn from and grow from. And my spiritual belief is that we are all here to gain experiences and to grow from experiences and to have lessons that shape us in any kind of form. There is no good or bad either. And to also see us where we can really put light within in order to understand that this is just an old identity, or like an old outdated version of ourselves that still wants to hold on to this fear that our mind created, or that we actually like thought we are. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, there's two things. One that comes up is it's that the space and how it helps. So it can be really simple. Even like I, I had a lot of moments over the last week where it's just more intense. You know, more emotional challenges and things coming up, and more anxiety and stress, these kind of things than usual. And I notice that I keep wanting to go to sugar. You know, I've noticed this before with cigarettes, with alcohol, you know, the phone, these kind of things. But it's this awareness. Okay, I see the whole drive saying, let's go get some sugar. Oh, we should just go out and get dessert. Or, you know, a spoonful of honey, because we don't have a ton of sugary treats in our house for good reason. I don't have a ton of self-control with it right now. But you see it, and I know that it's not just this impulse of I want a sugary, delicious treat, which is true, but it's coming from this emotional piece that's I'm trying to mask something. That instead of feeling what I'm feeling, I'm going to go and get a dopamine hit, or have some self-soothing with, you know, whatever it might be, a piece of cake or something, right?
Yeah.
And so in the past, it's just following that impulse and saying, okay, I want sugar, I'm going to go get it. I'm going to go to the corner store, the gas station, or, you know, make something that I want. But when you start having that separation a little bit, you can kind of question it to a degree, and you have a bit of a pause where you can interrupt that pattern and start choosing something differently. So instead of doing that, okay, I'm going to go outside for a little bit, and or go for a walk, or, you know, drink some water and feel into the anxiety that I'm feeling, be with it.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the other things you were saying was something about identity to a degree. And it's something you and I have talked about a number of times. But I think this is a big piece, is that it's a lot will come up when who you believe you are is challenged. And we have a lot of identities built up over time, and they're really sticky and really ingrained in our society, and actually encouraged. You know, not from some evil plot, but just how we've unfolded it. It's encouraged. So when those start getting challenged, and those are under threat, or under a perceived threat, you start seeing a lot of stuff come up as like a protection mechanism. Of, it's almost like the system says, we're under attack, and I'm going to go into fight or flight or freeze, and because my identity is under threat right now, who I am is under threat.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's a very interesting, way of looking at it, because how you put it makes so much sense, and it's so true. Like I can feel it in my whole being that this is just like the truth that you found out, but it's also the truth that I found out within my system, where, thank God, we go through different processes of like letting go of our identity, or like call it ego death or whatsoever what it is, in the end of the day, it brings us closer to our truth and it brings us closer to ourselves, but it's like a very, very uncomfortable process. But the more we surrender to it, I feel, and the more we are able to feel it, and thank you for this reminder, and really like, also be with the anxiety and be with the unpleasant feeling of like being totally overwhelmed. Because as soon as we allow it into our system, the sooner it can transcend into actually like a very exciting feeling, because it's exciting for our soul to find out who we are really beneath the surface and who we are really beneath everything that we actually like thought we are. And that can be seen in the external world, in regards of businesses, or in regards of like the societal status that we actually like achieved, or the relationships we encountered, or whatsoever. It can also be felt in our internal system, like really having moments and days and weeks and years or whatsoever where we struggle in order to actually like understand who we are. And I feel this is the beauty of the process of actually like letting the old die. And it just comes back to me right now in circle of how you can, and this is what I really admire, how you can talk about your past with being so unattached to it, because you can feel, and there is nothing good or bad wrong with it either. I can say from my own experiences, I can feel when I was writing newsletters and I was still very attached to in the past. I was attached to my upcoming. I was attached to like, who am I now? I finally tried to understand life, and I tried now my purpose. I understand what is my purpose in life, and all of a sudden there comes a shift, and it's just like it's a wave in my face, and it says like, take a little look deeper. Like this is like, it led you to a deeper understanding of yourself, but it's not who you are.
Right. Yeah. It's like a perpetual state of rebirth.
Yeah.
Just this ongoing process. Yeah. So the strange thing is, one of the first, the way I like to put it is that we all have this house of cards. This is the way that I see the symbol for it, and it's all your beliefs, your opinions, thought processes, the who you think you are, your goals, everything. It's this big house of cards, and we want to protect that. I mean, identity is a huge one in there, but you want to protect that with everything you have, because that's kind of your framework for reality. It's psychological safety to have that in place. And when it falls apart, which I now say I'm lucky enough to have had happen to a large degree, if it kind of got burned down through suffering, through life going in a direction that I really didn't want, you have the chance to rebuild that. And in that process, what I noticed is the identities and how much had been built up. And so some of them are kind of obvious. It's our nationality, maybe our political leaning. You see that all over you see it with everyone, of attaching myself to a political party. And then if you attack the political party, you're attacking me personally. And I think that's why people are so attached to it right now, among other things. But a fan of a certain sports team, and a business person, and intellectual, you have all these signifiers, and this is who I am, and you feel very comfortable saying, okay, this is it. And if any of that's challenged, you're going to defend it, because I'm defending myself. This is who I am. I'm all these identities. I'm a male. I'm heterosexual, all these different things, that if that becomes under threat, then I'm under threat. And so the process of starting to see that's not who I am, that's kind of what I'm experiencing in life. These are some of the things I enjoy, the tendencies. And the tricky one that was hard to look at was that one of the identities was depressed. And I think a lot of people have this. And for me, which again is all I can really speak to, but it's this aspect that it went beyond I'm experiencing depression, right? I'm experiencing sadness and grief. I'm having a really tough time, or but it becomes I am depressed, which that starts attaching to your identity. And it is tricky. That's part of who I am
Yeah.
is depressed. And you start carrying yourself in the world in that way. You start interacting with other people in that way, making decisions in that way. Your thought processes are formed through that filter. And to me, that was an extremely disempowering way of being. And it led me to a degree of victim consciousness where something's happening to me. I don't have control over it. That's just who I am. And that becomes really challenging to rebuild and to step away from if you're in the thick of it. Um, and the other thing with identity that comes up is we've talked about this before, but a few years ago I was making an art piece. I called it Rebirth, but it was essentially it's this background that's like scorched earth. It's all burned to the ground and just all black. And from it's coming this green seedling. And it's coming up of new life coming from what's been burnt down. And I was really excited as it was coming to being. I was playing around and having these ideas pop in. And at the time, I was thinking, okay, this is signifying this rebirth that I've just been through, of going from this old life into now being an artist, and you know, probably some spiritual ego in there, and all these different things that this is who I am, and this shift. And as soon as I finished it, essentially, I had a knowing it's time to move. It's time to leave my artwork behind, my woodwork behind. I was going to move with a little car full of stuff across the country, 6 days away, where I had never been to before. And I knew that I didn't have enough savings or kind of income because I was leaving my business behind to have a workshop. So what that meant to me at the time was essentially rebirth. It was like showing me I had attached this new identity. I'm an artist, and no, you're not that either. Drop it. Like, I love to create art, but that's not who I am.
Yeah.
And it was this really humbling experience of seeing how much we want to attach ourselves to who we are and be able to signify that of this is who I am, and have a resume and a set of 15 things I can tell someone. And it seems to happen over and over again that, as you said, if you grasp it too hard and you go, I figured it out, and this is
Yeah.
it, this is the purpose, and this is who I am, that it's like sand. It just kind of sifts through your hands, and you go, okay, like back into, the space behind that, more the who you truly are versus what you're doing with your time, what your beliefs are, what your opinions are, and what you're showing to the world. And there's a lot of freedom in that, but it's it's certainly an uncomfortable process at times, because I find life seems to challenge me on it, as you say. Like if you grasp, all of a sudden I see something will start to threaten that, to almost show, here's an area you're not free. Here's something else to let go of, or to integrate into yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating process.
It's a fascinating process, isn't it? It's kind of like interesting, it's like back in the days, the philosophers, everything, they were so wise because they didn't had so much distraction. It's like they were there with, at least it feels for me like I know that I don't know, it's kind of like really like the feeling of like questioning all over the time who we truly are. And it got a little bit distorted from our society because there's so much to do, like there's so much to explore, there's so much social media, there's so much to go, and this is like the unhealthy patterning that what you said in the beginning, what was very powerful, to really reclaim our own power, to really reclaim, to not put our hands in someone else's life so that we can just obey and just follow. No, it's kind of like really trying and figuring out your own truth, your own life, your own power, your own freedom, and whatever, however it looks for you. But it's your own path, and no one walked your path before, because no one is supposed to do that.
Mhm.
It's just about you and what's authentic and beautiful and uncomfortable and whatsoever you feel along the ride for yourself. And this is the beauty, and this is like something that I really admire also in our conversation, because it came up, like also for me last week, it came up for you, and it also comes up a lot recently, because I feel globally I was just like, oh my god, globally we are like awakening to our depth and to our own internal guidance and wisdom. And yeah, with that being said, besides like leaning deeper into like the discomfort and dealing with fear and loving it, what would you recommend? You know, you brought up like the connectingness to nature and how it really helped you in the process. What would you say to help people who are in a similar mindset right now, or in a similar state, but it's just right now the first leap of faith that they're going to do? What would you recommend for them? What tools can they use? Or
It's
yeah.
yeah, it's a tricky one because it might sound like a cop
Yeah.
out, but it's something you said, which is like we all have our own paths on this,
Mm-hmm.
and no two are the same. It's just not the case, and so a big part is owning that and going internally for your life, essentially for your guidance, for your path, what you want to do in life, what your opinions and beliefs are on everything. Go inside and filter it all through you.
Mm.
Um, and for me, that started with what I think how it starts with a lot of people is you kind of have this awareness of, oh, things aren't quite as they seem, and you start seeing everything externally that's wrong. So you know, what's wrong with, you know, maybe stuff that happened in your childhood, because everyone has this this experience with schooling system, with media. And for me, a big one was media and news. So I started realizing like you can look at 5 different news channels. Well, not five, but you can essentially, the easiest way to look at it is I could look at the left or the right and have 2 radically different points of view on something.
Mm.
Um, Democrat, Republican in the States. But you start realizing then, okay, so there's 2 different points of view being coming through these different news channels, government, and opinions, because everyone's really kind of divided in these lines. Canada as well. It's kind of these camps, right? And with that, then you start seeing, okay, there's also corporate interests coming in,
Mm-hmm.
and there's people's psychological beliefs and their biases and their upbringing and their identity and their career. And there's all these things that the information that's coming through is being filtered through. And the start for me was trying to find truth in that and trying to find what's actually real, because I can see there's 2 radically different stories being told and there's all this argument about it, but I know neither one of those is 100% accurate. There's this middle ground when you have to sift through everyone else's bias. So if you're talking to someone and they're telling you, um, if you're talking to someone, you can start seeing, okay, they have an incentive towards something, or this is their bias based on their own fears. This is their own projections, these kind of things. You kind of come back to yourself. So with that, I think it's similar on the path that it's putting everything internally. So to say what someone else should do is difficult because it becomes so unique and personal to each person. So for me, it was looking at, as I said, it's kind of like all these different aspects of psychology to start, and then philosophy, and then spirituality, and not going just deep into one aspect of it to say, okay, this is it, and I am, a Stoic, or I am a Buddhist. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but just for me, it was kind of going into these different areas and learning,
Mm.
um, and not saying, "Oh, this is the answer." If I have a psychological response, but then how do you pair that psychological meaning with maybe philosophy or the esoteric, or neurochemistry, these things, and create this holistic view? So with that process, it's kind of coming back to, okay, what's actually right for me, and that's the be all end all
Yeah.
of, uh Bella has this view that's wonderful, and I respect her, and I love listening to her, and um I think there's a lot of wisdom in it, but that's her path. That's your
Mm.
path. And this other person that, my best friend has this opinion, and my parents have this opinion, and sorting it out in that way. But that's everyone else.
Yeah.
But then coming back inside, and so with that, it ends up this process for me that's, going towards these things that genuinely light me up, and sometimes are scary, filtering out the things that are kind of I'm being drawn to, for me, typically numbing or avoidance, which was kind of certain habitual tendencies, a lot of them actually, even the phone, right? But starting that filtering process of heading towards what feels in alignment, what feels healthy, what lights you up, and starting to let go of everything that doesn't. And that letting go process can be really difficult.
Mm.
Um, and it takes time and patience, but over time it course corrects, to an amazing degree. Um, there's an analogy I've heard that it's like a huge tanker in the ocean, and what we want is this ability to just take, like, we're driving straight and we just want like an immediate U-turn. Okay, we're heading the other direction. But that's not how it typically happens. It's kind of these gradual course corrections where they can't just do a U-turn if you're in a massive tanker. You kind of do this tiny degree of a change, and they start heading a little bit left. And over a couple days, you've done a U-turn or whatever it might be. I'm not a marine expert, but it's this gradual turnaround, right? And uh, yeah, having kind of patience with that process. That I'm still trying to teach myself or step into patience with that process myself. Of um, step away from outcome happiness of I'll be good when, and I'll be happy when,
Mm.
dot dot dot, or uh, making healing or self development or awakening, or life kind of like goal oriented of here's the end goal, and I've made it, or this is when I've made it. But kind of continuing that refinement process, that I think it's evolution, and it's what we deal with for life.
That's amazing. How do you deal with it? Like, what can, especially because it's so in the mind, and especially in the masculine mind, okay, I can do this when this, I can step out of that in this time frame, but before that I need to gain more money, I need to do this in order to actually like be able to do this. So what are the tools, or what is your suggestion for people who are right there right now to take this leap of faith, but they still feel the fear that comes up because they were buying into the story of like having the story figured out, but in the next couple of years?
Mhm. Um, the first thing that feels important is it's the idea of prudence, but being aware that sometimes those things are necessary. So if you have a family, if you have certain bills, like, still not pushing that away and taking like really irresponsible or radical leaps. Sometimes how do I put it? Making sure that you're able to separate kind of basic fear versus common sense,
Mm-hmm.
and not going too deep with that. Make sure your kids have a roof over your head, and food, and um, that you're safe physically. These kind of things, right? Making sure not to throw that out. Um, But then I think it's taking steps in that direction. Sometimes it's not, for a lot of people, in a lot of cases in my life, it's not this always this big leap, but sometimes it is small steps.
Yeah.
Um, the example that comes up is I was, as I said, I kind of had moved back to my parents' house to get my life back in order, to make this radical shift and come back to myself. It saved my life. It was the best decision I ever made in the end. Um, but I ended up in my parents' basement um, during lockdowns and in a town that, you know, it isn't really aligned with who I am. Um, and a big part of that was being really disconnected from nature, is the sense of it. It felt very synthetic to me. It's kind of, you know, the well manicured lawns and, you know, these beautiful natural areas that I'd be going to all of a sudden had big Christmas lights and strobe lights. And near the end, like the trees were getting ripped up and to put bigger pathways in this this shift towards more suburbia versus nature. And I feel really at home in nature. So the calling got louder and louder. You know, it's time to start moving. It's time to get out of here. And I'd taken enough steps where I was able to do that. I didn't have to be at my parents' house. So I knew it wasn't time, you know, making that huge jump at the time didn't make sense to me, but I could start taking little steps. And some of those steps were as simple as, okay, I want to be in nature really badly. I could feel how much I wanted to live in the mountains, live more connected, more simple life. Um, and that's what big reason why I've always been drawn to the Rockies and into Western Canada. But I was in suburbia, so I'm not surrounded by that. I'm surrounded by manicured lawns and these aspects that I don't love. So what I started doing is each day, okay, I can't be in the mountains in my dream location, but I can go down to the lake uh, really early and watch the sunrise. And I would do that over and over and over again. Just spend an hour by the water and watch the sunrise with my dog and feel connected to that place that I'm aiming. Um, it's not where I want to be. It's not the full life, but it's one step in that direction. Finding on Google Maps, looking, okay, where are some creeks that I've never been to, and natural areas and parks, and getting myself to go there over and over and over again. So each day, each week, taking another step in that direction and going on an adventure and maybe doing a bit of my work out in nature in a park or you know, starting to garden, these kind of things where it's just one more step, one more step, one more step. And then when it's time to take that leap, there's kind of momentum behind it. And it's built up. It's kind of the natural next step to some degree. It's still scary. It's still this big leap, but it's the natural progression is kind of the feel. So it's not going from one day, one life, and then the next day the other life, but it's taking gradual steps in it and seeing where those steps need to happen. So, you know, for me, one of the examples was nature. One was uh, I couldn't sit in front of a computer and feel okay. My whole system would go awry. So, okay, time to day by day make sure that I'm able to incorporate more of that into my life so that I can sit on a Zoom call and not feel like I'm dissociating. Or if I have to do something for my business, being able to actually implement that and put it into action. And I think that's, you know, patience comes in with it, but then you're taking little steps in a certain direction. You're doing those course corrections gradually in a sustainable way versus if you're only trying to take major leaps every single time, it can be really difficult and a lot comes up. So it's kind of finding that ability to pair the two of taking gradual steps for me. And then when that calling comes, okay, time to make, you know, a really big shift and take a really big leap. But with that momentum at my back, with wind at my back versus, you know, pushing against a brick wall, which never seems to work out that well.
That is an amazing advice. Thank you so much for that. And also, before wrapping up our conversation, because it's so beautiful, and so there's so much to go even deeper into the topics. So who are you right now? How would you right now describe your identity in a way? Or is it even possible? Is it just a feeling even more?
Right now, it's more of a feeling.
Mm,
What comes up is like I exist,
yeah,
and it's like the I am state. But that's not to say I've let go of all the other identities. They're still there,
yeah,
and they pop up. But it's the stuff that I'm working through a lot of the time. So, um, yeah, seeing them come up, like I know one is that crept in is like I am spiritual, and last week was, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, and you know, as I said, the artist one, and
mm,
um, you know, there's all these different ones that I see, and it's not that I don't like to dive into esoteric and spiritual topics and have a lot of daily practices that are along those lines, and love, you know, that world, and that's what I experience on a day-to-day basis. But I am not that.
mm,
It's not that I'm not creating businesses or working to and experimenting and seeing what's possible to build as an entrepreneur would, but that's not who I am. Same with the artist, right?
yeah,
Um, but it creeps up. So like last week, it was big with the entrepreneur one came in, and then when that starts getting challenged, uh, you have another one of those little rebirth moments of it's kind of this come to earth moment that's not me. It's part of how I express myself, part of my experience, but it's not who I am.
yeah. You phrased it last time we spoke. You phrased it really beautifully. You said like, I do artistic work,
Hmm.
and this is something that really like stick on me. And every time now when people ask me, what are you doing? Who are you? I'm like, I do therapeutic work. And whatever it like seems like it shows up, it's how I am. I'm not a podcaster, I'm not a therapist whatsoever. I do therapeutic work. And
Yeah,
this is, I feel, the beauty, and it gives us permission to open up to even more depth, what God or the universe or whatever you want to call it can show us of who we truly are. It doesn't limit us anymore. And I feel all the time like those identities are here for limitation. And this is also something that we want to break out of as a soul, of limitations, of really like understanding, no, there are no such thing than limitation, except the limitation that we create in our mind. Um,
yeah,
so in what you said today, it really is so helpful, because it's a deeper understanding of like, we are not our thoughts, we are not our emotions, and we don't need to really like be impulsive and to act on our emotions. It's more like a fact of like, we connect to our heart, we let go of the old wounds that really like prevents us from doing so. And in order to connect to our heart, we are able to say to our mind, hey, like, please serve me. Like, let's do this together and figure out the necessary steps that we need to take in order to move forward. And that brought our conversation today up, because your experiences and everything you've been through in life, and every wisdom and knowledge and heart connection you just shared today, it's very impressive and very powerful. And I'm really thank you for that you were able to come today, and to express your deepest truth that you found.
yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. It's yeah, really nice to connect, and you know, it's a lot of stuff that it's what I live every day, but it's I think it's impacting everyone to like uh with what we're dealing with on earth right now, that everyone's having this stuff come up, and there's a nice feeling with that of the shared experience that you and I have talked about it, people all around the world with it, of um, radically different paths, radically different experiences, but a similar process that we're all going through, of, as you say, kind of coming back to wholeness, to who we are. And it's fascinating, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome what you're doing of chatting about that and being able to give those different lenses on that path that we're all on.
Yeah, it's like in the end of the day, we're all co-creating it together, right? Like in a broader aspect, and whatever, like even like us in our pre-conversation, we just have the pillars that we want to talk about, but we are surrendering to the flow of where it like leads to, and we trust the higher guidance through that. And I feel this is impressive and this is pretty cool where we, move towards in our society. And yeah, I'm just like, I'm just in awe, and I'm really like enjoyed chatting with you, and you phrased everything so beautifully. So yeah, I
Thank
really
you.
admire that, and
I appreciate it.
I appreciate that. And in order to, like, my one last question that I always ask is, because my podcast, the name is Masculinity Now, um, what does masculinity means to you?
Hmm. It's a challenging one to say. Um,
It is.
it's tough. I think a big piece is the balance still of, I think we're all experiencing a big shift away from a hyper masculine culture to
Mm,
something more balanced, of balancing in with the feminine. And so it makes it a challenging question of I see it as integrated, as a healthy expression of the masculine is integrating both of those. It's, as you're saying, it's the structure with the flow,
yeah.
um, and among many other things. It's the emotions with the intellect, and or the rational mind. Um, yeah, so it's a difficult one to express honestly. Um,
How does it feel in your body?
Feels more free now. Before it would be, it felt like, it's the repression and the masking and all these things. It feels more like trying to be a tough guy, right? Of
Mhm.
puff up my chest a bit and trying to intimidate people slightly, or you know, um, now it feels. I mean, what's coming up is the ability that it's rightful action is what's coming up, of being able to take those, more intuitive states, the heart's intelligence essentially, but take in those intuitive states, the intuitive hits, work with the emotions, and more of the kind of the mystical realms, and then actually take action with that and bring that into reality, um, taking those nuggets from the ethers and actualizing it. So for me, that's why I love these two things of entrepreneurship uh, and art, is that with both of them, you're taking something from the unknown realms, from inspiration, from an idea, from the ethers, and bringing it down and actualizing it and putting it into form, materializing it. Um, and so that is a balanced state, but right now, that's really what it means to me, is being able to bring that into form, uh, where what I experienced was, initially I was very much hyper masculine. Like our whole culture is women, men. I think it's across
Mm.
the board essentially. Do action, mind. And then I had this big swing along the pendulum to what was probably extreme feminine, of too much in, go with the flow, and no structure, no discipline, but too much in those floaty realms, which was, fantastic and what I needed. But now I'm trying to find that balanced state, which is how to work with both, have the structure so that you can flow within it. Bring those intuitive hits down with an act on it, and actually move forward with what I want to build and create and help others. Yeah, so bit of a ramble, but it's a tricky one. It's kind of a balanced state is what I'm aiming for. And with that, it feels free, honestly. The more I step into it, I know I'm not in some fully balanced, actualized state, but more working with those two to kind of find that balance, and try and stay within somewhat coherence. Yeah, that's the sense for me.
And that's beautifully explained, and the most beautifully explanation that I heard since a long time, because it's all about the balance. And I totally believe that it's always understanding that life is all about the balance. And the more we understand ourselves and where everything comes from, the more we can get back into balance and can back into our awareness and into our consciousness, and really observe us, and to use the correct tools that help us to put us back or in alignment, or remember where to go. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for today, Alex. It was very, very nourishing.
I appreciate it. Great to chat.